My very special thanks to Dr. O'Connor and to Marie Burke, who are on our panel. You'll be hearing from them a little bit later, and most especially to our panelists who are here today, one of whom is a new person joining us today, and the others who've done our inaugural mobile policy forum in really being brave enough to share their personal stories in a way that helps us to move forward. And, you know, the idea from this forum is probably crystallized in the story that some of you may have seen on the front page of the Boston Globe today, that talks about the fact that despite the increase in focus and in resources, the numbers of people suffering overdoses, whether fatal or not, continues to grow. I've been a district attorney for over 30 years. I have had the opportunity to work on lots of social issues that impact the criminal justice system, where with a focus and funding, the numbers have changed. I'll give you an example. When I started in the district attorney's office, we would have several thousand deaths a year as a result of operating under the influence. And early on in my career, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, lots of other groups really brought a lot of attention to this problem. The number in Massachusetts now hovers around 250 motor vehicle alcohol-related fatalities a year. That's still 250 too many, but it is about 10% of the original number that we had. So that shows you where things have gone. A simpler one is if you think, and we all know this, you think back 10 or 15 years to the feelings we had about smoking. I started in the district attorney's office when people smoked in their office. They smoked in the hallway, and outside every courtroom we had very large ashtrays. People would be horrified now if you lit a cigarette in the courthouse. So that has changed. What has, over the summer, really began to be an issue for me was I've been very actively, with the support of our elected officials, with the support of the police departments, working on this issue for almost 4 years now. And we're not seeing that change in the numbers. And while we don't see that change in the numbers, the problem continues. So it became my view that we can continue to do everything else that we are doing, but we are still losing people. And in order to not be in the position where we are waiting for things to take hold, we had to start a different focus. And for me, that really took two forms. One was to realize that this is a problem that is going to be with us into the foreseeable future. Even if we could somehow stop the level of people, stop right this minute, stop anyone else from becoming involved in opiates, to deal with the issues we have already would take us far into the future. So that led to our thoughts and our formulation of policies about a couple of things. The most important, and some of you have heard me speak about this before, are the children that are growing up in these situations. Children who are seeing some normalization of drug use, who may be experiencing the trauma of seeing an overdose of someone they love, and who may already be carrying some addictive personality traits that are going to lead them into abuse. You cannot, and I continue to say this, you cannot expect a 7 or 8-year-old to see an overdose in their home at 2 in the morning and go to 2nd or 3rd grade at 8 o'clock and really get what they are supposed to be getting out of that situation. So we have begun launching our trauma-informed response to children in those settings when we're responding. So we are having mental health professionals in the departments that we already have them embedded responding when they are responding. So that immediately, even for young children, things like art therapy, play therapy, are being incorporated into their life very quickly to help them deal with that situation. Another piece of it is thinking about there is only, no matter how much we are attacking this problem, resources have a limit. So what we spend our resources on really matters, and making good decisions about what is effective treatment, where we should put those resources is important. And to do that, it became clear that with all of the things that we have going on, what could perhaps best inform us would be if we started with the insiders. And that is our theme of these programs. This is a view from the inside as to what will make a difference in dealing with these issues. And we're going to begin with two experts, with Dr. O'Connor and with Marie Burke, who are really intimately familiar, both with the dynamics of addiction and with the inner science, physiological impact of addiction. They're going to talk to us briefly, and the point of that is so that we are all speaking the same language. When we talk about levels of addiction, when we talk about kinds of treatment, treatment has lots of forms. We should all start thinking about that in the same way. And then we're going to hear from our panelists who are in various stages of recovery themselves. And there is a remarkable piece to this, that the district attorney would be convening a panel where we have individuals in various stages of recovery, some of whom may still have some interaction with the criminal justice process. It speaks to the level of need in this area, that this is what we need to be talking about, and this is how we need to be informing ourselves going forward. And they will offer us perhaps the most critical information we need to affect public policy. And because as policymakers and as community leaders, we're really doing a disservice to those in the throes of addiction when we make policy from the outside without knowing what is effective. And before that, we're going to begin with Dr. O'Connor, who is the founder and president of Middlesex Recovery. And as a preamble to this conversation, Dr. O'Connor will talk to us a little bit about the science behind this problem. And then Marie Burke, who is a probation officer, the coordinator of the district court drug court program, as well as a licensed social worker and a licensed drug and alcohol counselor, will talk about the different levels of care that exist. And then we'll move on to our panelists and talk through a few pieces of that puzzle of where we are, what's been effective, and then we're going to open that up to questions. So that is our plan, where we hope that you will find this, as much as you may have worked on this issue, a new and different conversation. We encourage you to participate. And once again, we are incredibly grateful to everyone who's here to share their story with us. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. O'Connor.
So my name is Brian O'Connor, and I thought I'd start by just explaining who I am and how I got here, and then go into some of the science and physiology, which is basically how the body works with addiction. For those who have heard this talk before, I just want to reassure you that in medical school, the saying was, if you haven't heard it 10 times, it's not important. So you may be hearing some of the same things I've said before. First of all, I am been a staff physician at Hallmark Health for about 25 years, and I spent the first 22 of them as an obstetrician gynecologist, primarily labor and delivery in the office in Melrose. I delivered about 5,000 babies at Melrose Wakefield Hospital. It was my primary career for the greater part of my professional life, but I'm also the parent of an addict. And I was woefully unprepared for the role of parent of an addict. I went to a good medical school. I'm a relatively smart person. And my fund of knowledge had such a deficit when it came to addiction, primarily because I hadn't been exposed to it. And it really, back in the late 80s, middle 80s, it wasn't really a big point of discussion in medical schools. My son, who's 29 years old and in recovery, is an addict. And about 10 years ago, when we discovered his addiction, I decided I was going to cut to the chase and I was going to solve this problem once and for all. And so I've said, oh, where's the best place? Probably McLean Hospital. So we took him to the detox at McLean Hospital, and after 4 days in detox, we were doing our discharge planning, and I was discussing it with the discharge coordinator, and they were giving options for care. And I said, you know, what's the success rate of your detox? And so the intelligent question back was, well, how do you measure success? I said, well, now that we've identified the problem and he's aware and I'm aware and he's been detoxed, what's the chance that this is not going to be a problem, you know, for him in the future? And he said, probably about 1%. And I said, no, I want your success rate. And he says, that's the success rate of detox because detox isn't treatment. Detox is an entry to treatment. So when you see patients and we interview patients, you'll say, how many detoxes have you been to? 10, 15, 20, greater than 50. And so just understand just from the outset that detox is not treatment, but it's an opportunity if someone's in detox to get them into treatment. At the same time as all this was going on, I was seeing more and more pregnant patients coming in withdrawal, history of abuse, on Suboxone, on methadone, actively using. And so I needed to learn about it anyway, as well as my son. And eventually, after about 5 years of that, I started Middlesex Recovery, which is an outpatient treatment program in Woburn, treating patients with both Suboxone and Vivitrol. And I'll get into all that in a minute. So what I thought I'd do is I'd go over how I explain addiction to patients, because I think that having a common language, starting with some basic information that people understand, you can grow a fund of knowledge that helps you to, in whatever part of the care of the addict, whether you're a police officer, whether you're a nurse on the floor, a social worker, someone working in a detox program, in a recovery house, that you need to have basic understanding of how addiction works, why it works, what's the outcome, and what are the things that these patients face as addicts in daily life. So in that vein, I start by starting with a common word, which is endorphins. So I ask the patient, does everyone know what an endorphin is? And 99% of the time they say yes. So when the word endorphin is actually two words stuck together. Endo means inside of us, and orphan means morphine-like compound. So endorphins are morphine-like compounds that our brain naturally makes. And it works in a lock and a key system. So if you think of the endorphin, which is what we call a neurotransmitter, as the key and the endorphin receptor as the lock, if the key fits in the lock, it turns on that lock and some other action happens further down the brain, in the brain. Now, these endorphin receptors are in two main parts of our brain. One is right next to our spinal cord, and that helps to modulate or manage pain. So if you pinch yourself, the nerve fiber goes up through our spinal cord, and we recognize it in our brain. So if you're going to affect that pain, it's best that those endorphin receptors are right next to our spinal cord. The other part of our brain that has endorphin receptors is the center of our brain, or the limbic system. And the limbic system is the pleasure center of our brain. And we have a pleasure center because God, Mother Nature, whoever you believe in, wants us to repeat certain activities. And the way you get someone to repeat an activity is to make it pleasurable. So the obvious first example is sex. So if you had sex for the first time in your life and you said, that is the worst thing I've ever done and I am never doing that again, we would be extinct. But instead, we spend most of our adult lives trying to repeat that activity. The same thing with food. Dinner pill, a steak at Ruth's Chris, I'll take the steak anytime. Again, it's a mechanism for us for our species to survive. So we have found things in nature that also stimulate these endorphin receptors, and we call those things opiates. Now, if you were to go to Afghanistan and you were to take poppy plant seed pod and dry it out and make a cut in it, a brown liquid would come out, and that brown liquid is called opium. Now, opium has about 10 different molecules in it, but has 3 main molecules in it. The first is morphine. Everyone's heard of morphine. Morphine is named after Morpheus, who's the god of dreams. So even back when they were making up these names, they knew that this substance had a mind-altering effect. The second substance is codeine. Everyone's heard of codeine. It's in cough suppressants. It's in Tylenol number 3. And the third is something called thebaine, which I'll get back to in a minute. Now, there are a couple words that are thrown around in addiction. One is opium, one is opiate, and one is opioid. And if you look at the name of this is the Eastern Middlesex Opioid Task Force. And people need to understand what the difference is. Opium, again, is the substance that comes out of the poppy plant, and it has naturally occurring substances in them. So the naturally occurring substances are called opiates. And then semi-synthetic and synthetic substances that affect these receptors are called opioids. So you have opium, opiate, opioid. Now, we call it an opioid task force because the substances that we're talking about that are being abused include Percocet, oxycodone, which are all semi-synthetic opioids, and heroin and morphine. Well, heroin's actually an opioid too, but morphine is an opiate. I know it's confusing, but the words are thrown around as at least you know what the definitions of them are and what the relationship are to all of them. And I just want to go over some of these opiates and opioids and where do they come from. Okay, so in about 1870, Bayer aspirin, everyone's heard of Bayer aspirin, it was a German company at the time, they knew that the bark of a white birch tree produced a substance called salicylic acid. And what they found out is that if you add an acetyl group to the salicylic acid, you get acetyl salicylic acid, or ASA, which we now call aspirin. So about 20 years later, they looked at morphine and they said, I wonder what's going to happen if we add some acetyl groups to morphine. Maybe we can get morphine, which at the time was being abused, to be less addicting, and people have an allergic reaction to morphine, so there would be less allergic reaction. So they added 2 acetyl groups to the morphine compound, and they branded it heroin. And it was sold over the counter in the 1800s, the late 1800s, as a medicinal pain medication. Now, what happens, the chemical structure for heroin is di means 2, so diacetyl morphine. But when you take heroin, what happens almost immediately when it gets into your body is you start cleaving or cutting off those acetyl groups. So essentially what you're getting is morphine, but in a much more convenient form that is, people get allergic reactions all the time to morphine, so they don't get allergic reactions to heroin. Fentanyl is another compound that we see all the time in the newspaper now, and fentanyl is 100 times more potent than morphine. It is a synthetic opioid that works at the opiate receptor, but it is 100 times more potent. And so what you're seeing now, and this is what a lot of this information I'm getting from my patients when I ask why is the fentanyl in there. And essentially what you have is you have a certain amount of heroin that has a certain value, and you want that heroin to make you as much money as possible, so you start cutting it with different substances that actually dilute it out. And then all of a sudden, nobody wants your heroin because your heroin isn't any good. So what they found is if they add fentanyl to it, it again becomes more potent. But just like a batch of chili, if you add chili powder to the chili and you get the spoonful that's all chili powder, you're going to have a much higher reaction than if you get the spoonful that's mostly the beans and the gravy, etc. So this is real important. We have taken the endorphin receptor that I talked about, and we have renamed it the opiate receptor. Okay, so God, Mother Nature, did not put an opiate receptor in our brain just in case we found opiates in the 1850s or whenever we found them in Afghanistan. We have hijacked that endorphin receptor. That's real important. So what happens when somebody starts using? Okay? Well, I was trying to find a prop that I could use, and I found this folder that Marian Ryan had given us. And this is the best way to describe the lifetime of opiate addiction. If you imagine you're 20 and you're starting to date, and you meet the nicest girl in the world. She's fabulous, she's pretty, she's everything you would ever want, okay? That's this blue part of this folder, okay? The gray part of this folder, this lasts about a year. The gray part is 10 years of sheer misery, okay? Now, if you were to look at the folder like this, you'd say, 10% fun, 90% misery. I'm passing on this one. Unfortunately, you see the folder from this end. So all you see is the blue part, or the pleasure part of it. And you can't see it. As a parent, you've got a kid who's dating the wrong girl. You're like, I wouldn't go for this one. But he's like, oh, my dad, she's perfect. But you see this part, and as adults, we see this part. As adolescents, all they see is the edge of this. They just see the pleasure part of it, and it sucks you in. And most people think that opiate addiction or using is like 4 Chardonnays at a wedding. Like everything's happy, everyone's having a good time. It's misery, and I'll explain why. We have something in our brain, in our basic metabolism called our hedonistic tone. And our hedonistic tone is how good we feel about ourselves. And on a fictitious scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high and 1 being low, most people, if 5 is average, live between 6 and 4. You know, I got a new job, I lost my job. I got married, I got divorced. And as I said, some people that get divorced, it's actually an up instead of a down. But you live within this range of hedonistic tone. And when you start using substances of abuse, you raise initially that hedonistic tone. So if you say people live at a 5, there's some people who live at a 4.5. They're like Debbie Downer. And there's some people who live at a 5.5 where they always seem to be happy and have their act together. But you start using opiates and you go up to a 7.5 and you come back down again. And you say, that was a great experience. And you continue to this pattern, except what happens is that it requires more and more medication, drugs, cocaine, opiates in order to get to that 7.5, and you never quite get to that 7.5. The problem is your brain resets down to 4.5, 4, 3.5, and you get this, we call it in medicine, dysphoria. Dys means not. So euphoria is feeling great, dysphoria is feeling horrible. So you end up with this baseline dysphoria where you don't have any more pleasure in your life because you can't even get your hedonistic tone back up to 5 without the medication. So when you speak to addicts, they'll say, you know, in the beginning I was getting high, now I'm just using for 2 reasons. One is to stave off withdrawal symptoms, and the second is to get normal. They're no longer high. They're no longer experiencing that euphoric effect. They're just trying to get their baseline back up to 5. So there's one other part of the brain that I want to talk about. It's called the locus coeruleus, which isn't important other than the fact that it's what controls withdrawal symptoms. So withdrawal symptoms, when you speak to our panelists, once you're in the throes of addiction, it's the withdrawal symptoms that drive the train. That's what's driving patients' addiction. And what happens basically is you produce substances normally in your body that control all of your bodily functions. And the use of opiates suppresses down the release of those substances. And so the brain fights back by trying to keep it at an even keel by forcing the release of them up. So you've got this constant battle. Opiates pushing down, your body pushing up. Well, all of a sudden you take away the opiates and the release of those substances is massive in your body. And that produces all the withdrawal symptoms that we hear about and that patients tell about. And the mantra of it is if your body will produce a fluid, can't produce a fluid, it will. So you tear, you salivate, you sweat, you have GI symptoms, and patients will describe withdrawal as the worst flu of their life. And if you had the worst flu of your life and you're laying in bed and you knew that the cure was sitting on the dresser, the question is, how many hours/days would you lay in that bed before you finally got up and took the substance that within 20 minutes would make all of those symptoms go away? I'm just going to go into a little bit about treatment. When I explain to patients, I explain that their opiate addiction is like a room with one door. And if you think of the opiate receptor that we talked about, like the lock on that door, if you can control the lock on that door, then you can control the whole room. So there's certain types of keys that work on that lock. One key we already talked about is endorphins. The other key is what we call full agonist opiates, which are Percocet, Vicodin, heroin, morphine, Dilaudid. In the lock and the key scenario, you put that key in the lock, it opens the door the whole way. You get a full opiate effect, you get a surge of dopamine in your brain, and you get high. Now, everyone's heard of Suboxone. Suboxone is a medication that is used for outpatient treatment of opiate abuse. In the scenario, Suboxone is like a key that if you put in the door, it only opens the door halfway. Stops the cravings, stops the withdrawals, you don't get a big surge of dopamine in your brain, and the patient with substance use disorder does not get high. Now, if I were to take a Suboxone, I would be wrecked, as the patients call it. And the reason for that is that my doors have been closed for 57 years. So anything that possibly opens the doors is going to have an effect on me. But for an opiate addict whose doors have been wide open for 10 years, then opening the door halfway has little or no effect on them. Now, Suboxone, the active ingredient in Suboxone is called buprenorphine. And buprenorphine is a derivative of that third substance I talked about, thebaine. So it in itself is an opiate. So there's a lot of, not controversy, but there's a lot of discussion about whether it's substitution therapy. But statistically, patients have less criminality, less HIV, less Hep C, less loss of family, spouse, et cetera, when they're on that medication. Now, there's a big problem in the prisons with Suboxone, and the reason for that is that it has a very long half-life. The half-life, which is if you were to take the medicine, at what time is half of the medicine still working in your system, is about 31 hours, as opposed to full agonist opiates, which are measured in 1 to 2 hours. So in prisons, it's abused because it produces a long-acting effect. Let me just see if there's anything else. There's a couple, I'm going to talk about one other medication. In the lock and the key in the door scenario, there's a medication called Vivitrol or naltrexone. And if everyone here's heard of that, it is, if you think of methadone and Suboxone as treatment of active use, Vivitrol is relapse prevention. So in order to relapse, you have to have a lapse in there. So you need to be 7 days opiate free to be on this medication. But in the scenario, it's like a piece of chewed gum that you put in the lock. The door doesn't open, but if another key comes along, the key can't get into the lock, so it's an opiate blocker. Two major negatives associated with it. The first is that if you're hell-bent on getting high, you'll overdose and die. So it's not something that can be legislated. I got the father sitting in one chair. I got Johnny sitting in the other chair. The father's like, if you don't take this medicine, you can't live in my house. Well, Johnny's 18 and stupid, so he says, okay, fine, I'll take the medicine, but screw you, I'm going to try and get high anyway, and then he overdoses and dies. So it's an adult medication with adult consequences, and so it's a dangerous medication, but it's very helpful for patients who are properly informed as to the risks of it. Second negative is your brain doesn't care why you're taking opiates. So if you're on this medication, first of all, it comes in two forms, a pill that lasts 24 hours and a shot called Vivitrol that lasts about 40 days. So if you're on this medication and you break your leg and you end up in the emergency room, and then just giving you morphine or Dilaudid or whatever pain medication they want to give you isn't going to work. So it's not great for someone, let's say it was kidney stones, who every other month they're rolling around the gurney in the hallway of the emergency room in pain because they're going to need pain medication. Just a couple other things I want to say, because my wife says I love the sound of my own voice. So the progression of this disease is almost uniformly the same, which is that someone starts on Percocet. So when I do my histories, I write a P with an arrow, an H, SN with an arrow, and HIV, and I just fill in the ages. It's the time from Percocet to heroin snorting is measured in years. Heroin snorting to heroin IV is usually measured in weeks and months, and no one ever goes backwards. Just two things that happened the other day. I went to a Harvard course, and a real important, just one concept that was made is that addiction is really a pediatric disease. Most people who start as teenagers. And so in this conversation, pediatricians need to be involved because they are the ones who are the caretaker of these patients when the disease initiated. And the other is a patient of mine yesterday said to me, she says, I never go on Facebook anymore because I call Facebook the obituaries, because all I see on Facebook are RIPs for people I know overdosing.
Good morning, everyone, and first and foremost, I have to thank Marian Ryan for putting this wonderful forum together to look around the room and to see the policy makers, the decision makers, the Sheriff's Department, Carol Cafferty, the Superintendent of the Billerica House of Correction, the police departments. Obviously, our world is changing. I know from being in this business for 35 years that the clients and the defendants that I've worked with as a probation officer in years gone by saw it as us against them. It is no longer that. Everyone, the district attorney who prosecutes cases, is trying to help find a solution to this problem everywhere that she goes, and she is everywhere. So, Marian, thank you. Thank you to everybody who showed up today and to this panel of wonderful people in recovery who will help and enlighten you to what works for them and what did not work for them. I think hopefully you'll all get a lot out of this. Marian asked me to speak a few weeks ago, or a few months ago when we were planning this forum. She asked me about talking about levels of care. And I said, oh, sure, I can talk about levels of care. And then before the last forum, I had done so much research on levels of care that I way overthought it, because it's really a course. It could be a college course on a level of care that someone should go to. So I'm going to try to give you a 10-minute overview of what the system offers. The Bureau of Substance Abuse Services, and just if anybody wants it, it's a 50-page document. There is a document on their website called Access to Substance Use Disorder Treatment in Massachusetts, and it's from April of 2015, and I can certainly give you the website afterward, but it gives you all of the levels of care, how many beds we have in this state, how many people are looking to open new programs and look for licenses, and it's very helpful to go by. But this research, as of April, said that 10% of residents in Massachusetts suffer from a substance use disorder, and that most people first come into the substance use disorder, and that's what it's called now, SUD, substance use disorder system, through detox, which we've heard from the doctor about, who is much more able to explain detox than I am, because it is a medical procedure. The average length of stay in the statistics is that detox is 7 days, and it's to alleviate the symptoms of withdrawal, a medical procedure. Treatment does not begin there. It is not expected that when you leave detox, you are ready to handle all of the things that you need to handle. We are always hoping that someone is going to go on to treatment from detox. Withdrawal symptoms can be painfully intense, and in case of alcohol and benzodiazepines are potentially life-threatening. Detox is also referred to as ATS, or acute treatments, the acute treatment services, but nobody refers to it that. In this state now, in Massachusetts, we have 4 hospital-based detoxes with 150 beds and 20 freestanding programs with 710 beds. And we have the ability to serve 3,500 clients in a month in this state who need detox. The problem is that after you complete detox and go on to the next level of care, we are way underserved there. And that is where, and Katie certainly can tell you a story of her own experience, and that is where we see so many deaths, that people leave detox without another bed. In the detox, I can't imagine working in a detox and having to say to anyone, we have no bed for you, here's the street. And it happens every day, over and over and over. The next level of care after detox, one more thing I want to say about detox is that we all do the same thing every day when we're looking for beds in a detox. We all get on the phone, we all start calling these beds at 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. I need a bed for a male, I need a bed for a female. You have to have the patient with you because they want to do the intake with the patient. You can get referrals to detox from an emergency room, from the court, from your probation officer, from a family member, anybody, a doctor, a physician, anyone can make the call. If you are unable to find a bed and your relative, family member, person is a danger to themselves or others, the way to go about getting further services is to enter the court near where the person is and lives, and that process is called a Section 35. You come into a courthouse, you talk to a clinician in the court clinic who takes information on how or why you believe the person you're talking about is a danger to themselves or others, and it can't just be that they're using heroin. It has to be some other behavior that goes along with it, like they're caring for a child, like they're driving a car, like they're mixing other drugs. It has to have a little more to it than that you are just using heroin. After you give your information to the psychologist or psychiatrist, that person goes to a judge in the district court and asks for a civil warrant if the judge deems that it's appropriate. At that time, and those warrants only go, they used to be called sunrise to sunset. I don't know if that's been extended now. I hope it has. But the police try to go out and locate the person as quickly as possible and bring them, arrest them, but it's a civil arrest, and bring them to the court where they are evaluated. They are assigned, they're given a defense attorney and evaluated for commitment to one of 2 sites within Massachusetts, the Men's Addiction Treatment Center in Brockton and the Women's Addiction Treatment Center in Bridgewater. There are only 142 beds in those 2 places. If the person is deemed to be a danger to themselves or other, the judge sends them off to one of those 2 facilities, hopefully. However, if beds are not available in either of those sites and the person has been deemed committable, the men go off to the MASAC program down at the Department of Corrections in Bridgewater, and women And I think this is changing. If it hasn't already changed, it's changing within a very short time. Women were going off to MCI Framingham on civil commitments, which even the superintendent of the prison didn't know how to handle. They did not have criminal cases, and they ended up in a women's prison because there were no other beds. But there was a lawsuit filed, and I think High Point is opening a program in either Brockton or Plymouth to handle the overflow of women who can't get into WotC, which is a wonderful thing. But that's your other way into detox. The next level of care is to CSS. That's community support. That's where we hope you go after detox. We hope we can find a bed. However, there are only 11 programs with 297 beds, and they can serve 600 individuals a month. CSS is also a medically monitored. As with detox, insurance is required. Insurance is also required with CSS because you are continuing to be followed by a nurse and a doctor and to help continue to alleviate your withdrawal symptoms. The average length of stay in a CSS is 30 days. While you're assigned a clinician, you work with a case manager on your next level of care and develop a treatment program. The biggest problem in this system, the way it is developed now, is that your treatment program is developed by the client, who oftentimes is not ready to make good decisions. But that's the way our system is set up now. And so if the client says, I want outpatient, the clinician knows the person needs residential, they set up the outpatient. And there isn't a heck of a lot that we can do at this point in time with that. Also, though, a critical problem that we have seen, because most people want to do, at that point in time, they're only a week or two clean, they want to do the least restrictive setting. So you stay in a CSS for 30 days. Sometimes you stay a little longer, sometimes you stay a little shorter. The goal then is hopefully to go on to the appropriate level of care, whatever that is. That is determined by a clinical assessment at the CSS. The other option, which is a low-level support service, is the TSS, which is Transitional Support Services, where you can go from detox or from a CSS while you're waiting for a bed in a residential program. In Massachusetts, there are 9 programs for that now, with 339 beds, and they can service 331 persons per month. So with these two next levels of care after detox, we have 937 beds per month, or servicing 937 people per month, when we have servicing 3,500 in detox. So we do not have enough beds to go to the next level of care. There are 2 TSS programs that are set up just for Section 35 referrals, and that's another 80 beds in that, but they directly come from MATC, WotC, MASAC, or MCI Framingham. The next level of care, which is the one that I work mostly with and there are many people in this room who are working in that system, the residential treatment programs. Could not live without them. Change lives every day. Everybody on this stage will tell you about the benefits of residential treatment. Unfortunately, we seem to be losing beds rather than gaining them, and I have seen miracles in the hundreds and probably thousands of people that I have referred. The change that you see over the course of 6 months in treatment, and the statistics are clear, the longer you're in treatment, the longer you stay clean. That's a fact. And 6 to 9 months, sometimes up to a year, is the time that you need to learn to live again, to develop the appropriate daily living skills, lifestyle, cope with stress, anxiety, family problems, while you're in a supportive environment of staff and other clients who are going to help you get through those bad days and not walk out the door. And certainly the people on our panel can speak more to that. There are 79 recovery homes in Massachusetts now with 2,281 beds. There are different levels of recovery home. There's a recovery model. Halfway house is the term that you most often hear. They are structured programs of treatment where you are expected probably within 30 to 45 days to go out and look for employment, to develop your recovery network outside of the house, get a sponsor, join a group, attend probably 1 or 2 groups in the house per day, be part of that community, do chores in the house, just get your daily living skills back. That level of care, you've got to be someone who's ready for that. You got to be ready to go out to look for a job, and your anxieties, the other daily living skills that you have lost along the way, even budgeting, even going in to ask somebody to hire you sometimes. I have had more people taken out of recovery homes because of the fear of being turned down or just the fear of asking somebody for a job. The social model, a house that is mainly run by the residents. Less structure, the rules, you're expected to be able to follow the rules. It's a higher level of functioning. And then the therapeutic community model, which most of my drug court participants do the best in a therapeutic community. It is an extremely structured, supportive environment where there are a lot of rules, but there's a tremendous amount of support. The safety and security that comes as a result of being in one of the therapeutic communities, to me, you watch the change take place. So love those programs, love all these programs. And there are also programs and beds within the state for pregnant and postpartum women. There are some programs like Project Cope, Edwina Martin, where a woman can go and her newborn can join her at the program. So those programs are available as well. There is a level of care that's not in this book that I really want to talk about because major changes are taking place, and Richard Winnan is here, and he is the president of the Mass Association of Sober Houses, because what everybody keeps saying, we are never going to have enough beds. There are never going to be enough BSAS residential treatment programs, and there is a tremendous need out there. And BSAS, the legislature has, asked BSAS within the year to come up with an accreditation and certification program for sober houses in Massachusetts. Richard, as the president, is trying to weed out the bad ones, because I have had more parents think that paying $150 a week to a program, their child is going to be safe, and not knowing anything about the program. And some people who run the programs are not as I don't know, they don't run the programs, I guess, the way we would like them. All of Richard's programs, Steve Sheldon is here from a new program in Lowell. I don't know if there are other people in the room as well from sober housing, but some wonderful programs provided with wraparound services, urine screens, counseling, are the next best level of care that we can get. I always use sober housing after someone leaves residential treatment for that transition before you go out and go back home. Because after you leave the supportive environment of residential treatment, you need to kind of get used to living life independently again, and the sober houses are also a great model for that. And I don't want to forget Danielle is here, and other people from the recovery model, which she can talk a lot about. The Divine Center in South Boston, someplace for people to go who are clean and sober, need to socialize, get support while they're living their lives. It's a whole other branch of this recovery model that is growing. We have Mary here also, who works in the CSS and the detox. You have people on this panel who are at all levels of care and employment. That's kind of my quick story of level of care. I don't want to forget outpatient. BSAS clearly says that they have no idea how many people are doing outpatient treatment, because it's going on individually as well as like at the Middlesex Recovery Center. But they do not have a handle on just how many outpatient, especially individual therapists, are doing substance abuse treatment. Also, MAT, which the doctor spoke on as well, but that's the quick overview, and as I say, I think it's a 2-day course. Thank you.
Thank you. What we're going to do at this point is turn to our panelists, which will by all means be the most significant part of our program. And what I'm going to be doing is asking a couple of people to respond to each of the questions we want to talk about, moving through a little bit about their acquaintance with opiates, the path that their addiction took them on, what became helpful, what roadblocks there were to that, and what was ultimately successful, and then some of the questions they have about policy going forward. So I'd like to start by asking Jared and Katie to talk to us just a little bit about what brought you to the use of opiates. Tell us a little bit about where you were in your life, where you are now, and that path.
Thank you, Marian. My name is Jared Owen. I'm living proof sitting before you that the disease of addiction does not discriminate based on socioeconomic status, based on education. I grew up in a nice middle-class family. I started drinking, stealing from my parents' liquor cabinet, very young, 12. I was immediately drinking for effect. I had and have what I can now identify as a mood disorder and a very strong genetic predisposition to addiction. My disease progressed just as the doctor spoke about. I attended the University of North Carolina, where I received a bachelor's degree in biology. I began drinking every night. I began experimenting with pills. I matriculated to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where I was working on a PhD program when I became addicted to opiates, eventually to the point where I was IVing heroin. I lost everything overnight and became involved with the criminal justice system. I did 18 months in the system. I now live in a residential treatment program. I've been there for 8 months. I have 2 years without the use of any substances. And my life is getting better. You know, I'm also living proof that treatment works and that we need to make some serious changes to this system, both to help society and to help individual addicts. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie. I too myself grew up in like a really good home, and I was exposed to addiction through my brother, and I watched him grow up, and I said that will never be me, and I was terrified of the life that he lived. And for me, like, I also picked up a drink, and my first time drinking, I put myself in a coma. So right there, that just shows I had no business. I wouldn't even call it experimenting, because like I couldn't experiment with anything. I did everything way over the top, and instead for me it was, how can I feel that feeling again? Because I just didn't understand the severity of what I was doing and what I put my family through. And I started with the behaviors, running away from home, hanging out with like who I thought was cool and who I wanted to be like, and I just I completely just went against anything that my parents said, and I just experimented with anything that I could, pills, anything to take me out of myself, because I was so uncomfortable with who I was. And I watched my brother struggle with opiates, and he handed me my first Perk 30, and I thought that that was okay, and I wanted to see what was so good about this, that he could ruin his life. And I did it, and for me that was like, this is it. And I was willing to ruin any relationship in my life. I worked for a bank. I had a good life, and I had goals for myself, and instantly those went right out the window. And I mean, I was living with abusive boyfriends. I was doing whatever I could to get that next one, and not even realizing that I was completely ruining my life. I mean, towards the end of it, I was 20 years old, homeless in downtown Boston, and I couldn't understand how my life got to how it was, how I could just be okay with sleeping outside and just completely disrespecting myself. And I mean, a drug became more powerful than any love in this world, and it was what I believed. I believed I was going to die as a heroin addict. And I mean, I turned 21 in Framingham State Prison, and growing up, that's not how I pictured my 21st birthday. I pictured like, this is fun and I can do this, and my family used to always say, you'll never be able to just have a couple drinks. And I didn't understand that, and what they were trying to tell me is that I have an addiction that runs through my bloodline that's much greater than anything that I can handle. And eventually, when I was ready to let go, I went to the Meridian House. I'm a graduate of the Meridian House, and for me, like, it wasn't just the drug, it was, I didn't know how to live. They taught me how to make my bed in the morning, how to be accountable. Like, I couldn't speak in front of people because I was just so uncomfortable with who I was as a person. So for me, like, I needed a therapeutic community. I needed to get the support and the love and the structure and really figure out who I was, because I'm still very young, and I don't know what I like, what I don't like, and I mean, it's been a very interesting journey to figure out those things about myself, and I learn more every day.
Can you talk to us a little bit, and we've talked about this before, sort of the feeling that people may have that when you might be present and someone overdoses or that sort of thing. Everyone thinks, wow, that must scare people. They want to get away from that. And can you tell us a little bit about whether that's true or what the experience is?
Yes, definitely. I'm Carrie Ann. I was actually just saying this the other day, like when I would go and use with somebody, most of the time I was by myself, but if I would go and use and it's really sad to say this, but if somebody were to overdose, like in my presence, I would be furious because I would get mad that like my selfishness and my disease was like, oh my god, I have to take care of somebody else, so it's going to cause attention, or you know, and I'd have to call the police, and it would turn into like this domino effect of situations that I didn't want to be a part of. And you know, like I remember I had an incident, and I was using, and I was in the bathroom, and I could feel myself. I got high, and I could feel myself like leaving my body, and not really even being scared about it, because like at that point, like Katie said, I didn't see a future for myself. I didn't see myself being like a productive member of society. Like I saw myself as a heroin addict, and you know, when I came out of that overdose, I was furious. I was really mad because now I'm sick. You know, my withdrawal symptoms were awful, and then, you know, I had to realize like where I really had myself at that moment. But like the way my addiction is, like Katie said, I end up downtown Boston homeless, and like the sole purpose of was feeding like my drive to get high is because I don't want to live anymore. That's what my disease tells my head. So.
Now, Meredith, you had some professional training that gave you a sense of the use of opiates and their use in the medical community. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. My name is Marian. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis about 15 years ago, and that was when opiates came into my life. I think I always had the behaviors of an alcoholic my whole life. You know, you have to look at impulsivity and immediate gratification, and I had all of those isms before I picked up a drink or a drug. But when I did finally get diagnosed with MS and the nerve pain got so bad, and the doctor was really overprescribing me medications, I can say this today, and I fell in love with it. I don't know what happened, but something changed within me, and I needed it every day. So I sought out doctor after doctor, and I did, you know, I went to different pharmacies, I went to different doctors, because you go to any lengths. By the end, I was on fentanyl patches, which Dr. O'Connor was saying that 100 times, is that what he said? 100 times more powerful. And I was also on Percocet. I was also on Klonopin. At that time, I don't know how, but I was a semi-functional single parent, and I was a nurse. I never really took care of anyone I've been a nurse for 18 years. I've never really taken care of people except for the last 3 years that had addiction issues. Never really had it in my family like everyone else. Grew up in a hardworking Irish Catholic family. I went to Catholic school my whole life. We didn't have much growing up, but we had good education and food on the table. And went on to nursing school, got diagnosed with MS, and my life completely changed. After I did the doctor shopping, they realized that I was abusing the meds, and they stopped writing them, and I got panic-stricken. And like Dr. O'Connor was saying, those withdrawal symptoms were so severe. I was a rag doll in bed, and I just remember laying there, and this may sound graphic, but to understand the severity of opiate withdrawal, I was laying literally in my own vomit, and I couldn't get out of bed. I was sweating, and it was awful. And at the time, I wasn't surrounding myself with very good people, and the person that I was with at the time was in recovery, and he had relapsed and brought me to a friend's house. And as Dr. O'Connell was saying again, you know, you have that thing hanging on the side of the table, and you know, if you can go get that and feel better, I was taking pills, and I was that girl who would always say I would never, ever do heroin. I would never put a needle in my arm. I was that person that was, better than a needle. And sure enough, that day that I peeled myself away from my bed, I snorted heroin for the first time, and instead of weeks, it was the next day I was shooting it. Within 6 weeks, I had robbed multiple banks. I was in prison. I lost my son. I lost my car. I lost my house. I gave everything I had away. I got in a lot of trouble, and for the first time, I realized I was definitely had a problem. It took that, it took me sitting in Framingham with murderers and people that were lifers, and I was there thinking that I didn't belong there. I was so sick. It took taking everything out of my life for me to have any gratitude for the smallest thing in the world. And that I'm grateful for. I used to be really ashamed of my felonies, and I used to be very ashamed and nervous just to talk to anyone if the people saw me, if they read about me. And it's not about me, it's about it was my addiction, and I'm a different person today. I did go to treatment, and I was in a therapeutic community after prison, and it changed my life. It taught me how to live again, and it gave me hope, and I was surrounded by people that had this common goal, and supportive housing and treatment is so important. Working in a detox and a CSS now, which, when you do the right thing every day and you continue to do well in your life, even as a recovering heroin addict, you do get things back. And I was blessed with my nursing license. I was blessed to have gone to the board and have these wonderful things, and you would never imagine that somebody that did what I did should have these things, but it's God in the program. Anyway, I'll get off that, I don't know. But working in a detox and a CSS, I tell my patients all the time, you need two things to get sober: willingness and courage, and we'll handle the rest. And I think it's difficult to get that willingness because the obsession is so huge to have that drug that the willingness to get high is a lot higher than the willingness to get sober most days. And it took me having to get locked up in prison to realize I actually had a problem. I mean, that's how sick I was, and I realized I had a problem, and I gave up my will that always got in the way. My ideas, my creative thinking got me in prison, so obviously my thinking is wrong. So I turned my will completely over to my higher power, got involved in the program, and we'll get better and need to recover. It's not all people in an alleyway, homeless, dirty, shooting heroin, and people that look like us that was it.
Billy, you're on the staff now at Marian House, one of the programs we talked about. Tell us a little bit about some of the roads that you went down before you got to Marian House.
Again, Billy, long-term recovering addict, grateful to be here. I also, like you said, went through a therapeutic community, but I've been involved with a bunch of different treatment modalities, and through my experience of using and going through treatment, I'm somebody who's been on Suboxone, been on methadone. If anyone remembers Dr. Kishore, I was on Dr. Kishore, we would say, take this pill, hope you feel better. And I was like totally out of my mind. I was in halfway houses, I was in jail. I went to almost any lengths to try to get clean. Since I've been clean, I've gotten the good fortune of working in testing labs where I got to go into different treatment modalities and see different philosophies. I've gotten the chance to be a relief worker for a therapeutic community. I got the ability to manage a therapeutic community. Currently, right now, I'm a recovery coach for the agency. So I'd like to say I have some fairly good experience about what works and what doesn't work. I love that she's sitting next to me because that's what I believe in right now is the drop-in centers, these recovery centers, these community-based centers where if someone can't get access to treatment, which we need people to get access to treatment, we need these places, these community centers where people can go. When I was getting clean, sometimes there was nowhere to go. You know, if you went to a halfway house, you know, they'd be like, go out and look for a job. The person had no life skills, and you know, you go out, you wouldn't even know what to do with yourself, right? These recovery centers, these drop-in centers that are opening up are so useful right now because people go there and they feel they're not alone, right? And I think they're very important. And then also, I'm going to say this because I believe my piece, like I admire Dr. O'Connor, like, and his story about what he's doing is, when I worked for the testing lab, a lot of the doctors did not regulate, they were not regulated. Too many times I would see somebody come in, right, and I would test them, and they would be dirty from A to Z, and the prescription was still written, right? And as somebody who's in recovery who has to have some type of boundaries working for the lab, like I can't go over to the doctor and say, listen man, you should not be writing this, but I think it's a big issue is that the prescription medication, the way certain people are not regulated, and I think it floods society. On what is, and again, like access to recovery. I'm somebody who's, you know, I got clean December 20th, 2006. I said, like, there wasn't, like, I'm proud to be somebody who's in recovery, man. I have a lot of people in this room that I know, that have worked with these treatment providers, individuals that have just, like, everybody is coming together. It's an absolutely beautiful thing, and that's what it is. There needs to be some type of identification. There needs to be some type of nurturing. The therapeutic community, these long stay programs where somebody you can see, it's evidence. These drop-in centers where you see people go in and they feel like they're a part of, and you know, we share it. Like when you're using and you're caught up in the grips, like you feel so lost. Like I remember sitting in my bed, puking, pooping, right? Like not like shaking, and my mother like holding me and saying like, you know, please, you know, can't you just stop? And like I remember almost pushing my mother down a flight of stairs because she was trying to get to my IV needle, right? And that's like something that I don't ever want to advance. So I believe in like education, I believe in treatment, I believe in drop-in centers, I believe in this stuff, and that's why I'm really grateful to be here.
Lots of times when we're having this conversation, one of the things people talk about is something Billy mentioned, that even if they're able to come out of detox or they're clean, just not being able to go back to their old life, to their old friends, and needing, especially if there's a lag time between when they're coming out and they're getting into treatment, to have a place where they don't know how to hang around, they don't know how to have any fun without going back to people who are using. So can you speak a little bit just to how the recovery center fits into that?
Okay, so my name's Neil O'Brien and I'm in recovery. Have been since September 6, 2011. And it was so amazing, the forward thinking and the fact that you guys are all here listening to what we have to say, and I appreciate that so much. Because I believe this is what's going to make the change and actually save some lives. That's why I'm here today. Because sometimes I get nervous with the idea of speaking in front of large groups of people or the idea that there's cameras and things like this. But I do it because I really want to try to save lives because I've experienced such loss in my life, and it could have very well been me. So to piggyback off what some of the other people said, my story was continuum of care. Prior to that, it was progression. I had a fear of stigma. Nobody in my family were drug addicts. There were certainly alcoholics or people who drank heavily, if you will, in my house and in my community. That was actually very socially accepted. But I was on the flip side of it, and I was very embarrassed for that, so I kept it hidden for a very long time. Ultimately, when I did realize I had an issue, I was very unaware of services, and when I even started going to treatment, or a few days of treatment, which is not really treatment like they said earlier, I was never encouraged to go any further than that due to the lack of beds. I mean, the people who were asking for it or knew about it were going to get it, and where I was very unaware of any supports in my community, very unaware of 12-step, very unaware of long-term treatment, I suffered a lot longer than I had to. My issues with the justice system started immediately, and I kind of became segued into that route instead of into any help. And that went on for a long time, and until ultimately I was given a chance at treatment. And what saved me was ultimately the courts encouraging it and allowing it through a drug court program. Prior to that, they never ever let me go to treatment. So I repeated the same patterns because I didn't know what I didn't know. And so the continuum of care that I received going through that, like people touched on with the required to graduate treatment facility, which in my case was the first model she discussed, which was, we worked, it was a little looser but not completely loose. It was considered halfway houses. Going on then to a 3/4 style house, which is sober houses that are very similar to they're trying to say now, which there's really a structured program to it, there's structured urines to it. I was very grateful for that because it was a segue. It was a segue back to society that I believe was really good for me. It allowed me to form strong bonds with women that were on the same journey as myself. And then what was key, which was what you asked about, was coming back into society and what that looked like. And I had over a year sober when I returned to South Boston, which is where I'm from. And that was a very pivotal time, even with that much time, but I had been removed. So how am I going to acclimate? How am I going to re-socialize? And I was so blessed that the recovery center where I work at today, which is Divine Recovery Center, it's part of the Gavin Foundation in South Boston, had opened. And I thought, what a novel idea, because otherwise I was gonna go back to the same people, places, and things. It was just what it was. I was returning home. So how am I gonna find new ones? And that's exactly what the place provided. And I found myself wanting to give back to the community as I changed, because like Mary said, the person you become when you're in active addiction is so different from the person that you are when you rediscover it. Like Katie was saying, rediscovering who you are, what you like. One of the things I found I liked was advocacy. One of the things I found I liked was bringing people together for events and things like this. And I liked volunteering with the elderly. I like volunteering with veterans. That stuff I like to do. So this gave me a platform to do that. And we come together and we give back to the community. We re-socialize. At first, like a center like where I work can be very simple. Somebody comes in to play pool. They don't really want to talk to anybody. They're not there yet. But they watch. You can see other people around them for multiple years, helping out people with maybe 2 weeks, fresh out of a detox. And it gives them the courage to continue. And I think that the last thing I just want to say on that is what you touched on with the importance of that next step. I really hope it's being addressed. So much stuff that was being addressed 2 years ago is now actually happening. So I'm super excited and hopeful. All that advocacy stuff I did 2-3 years ago is now coming to light. But one of the areas is that next step after detox. The numbers, like Marie said, are just so drastically different from amount of people seeking help and the amount of people able to receive it. And I really think that that's important. But I do think it's crucial if you want to put a dent in some of the numbers, which is basically the ultimate goal, right? To save a life or to end recidivism of people going back in and out of detainment in the local jails and prison systems, is having a continuum of care and then having community support that welcomes them back and lets them find a new life in recovery.
All of you have made a very long and courageous journey to the point where you are today. Looking back on that, is there a place where you see that some type of intervention could have put you on that path to recovery sooner? Was there a place along the way where if something else might have been available, if something else might have been afforded to you somewhere, you might have gotten to where you are today sooner?
Yeah, I think that intervention is something that we really need to work on. If I had had more information about substance abuse disorder, if there had been less stigma about substance abuse disorder, if doctors and mental health professionals were asking the kinds of questions like, do you have a family history of alcoholism? Have you ever taken more of these pills than you should have? I think that it might have kind of pointed me in the direction of finding treatment earlier before I got to the very desperate place that I ended up in. You'll notice that I introduced myself with my full name. That's because I believe that if we're going to change the stigma, we need people who are in recovery to stand up and without shame say, you know, I'm a recovering addict. You know, this is a public health issue. It really needs to be dealt with as such. As the disease progresses, I think there's this perception that, you know, heroin addicts are out, you know, having a great time. But as the doctor said, it becomes a very miserable way of life. It becomes a very private thing, a very intimate thing. As Carrie Ann said, she used mostly alone. I used almost entirely alone. I hid it from everyone because I was ashamed. And when people tried to help me, I pushed them away. So anything that we can do to reduce that stigma and educate people so that intervention can happen earlier, I think is a good thing.
Again, Carrie Ann, and I said it at the last forum, but I'll repeat it now. Like, I grew up in a nice town with a nice family. You know, both my parents worked. Neither one of them used or got high or drank. There wasn't any abuse. You know, I had really good morals, and, you know, obviously, like, my parents' intentions were, you know, to guide me to the best life. And it was myself, my own insecurities, not being good enough, that led me down the road that I went down. But in the beginning, when I first started using pills, I started using pills because I had surgery and I got prescribed the medication. And you know, I ended up dating somebody that was at that time selling OCs, and you know, I was very naive to OCs and the life and the road that I was really going to be going down. So when everybody was saying, like, you're getting high or you're using, to me, I'm like, no. In my head, it was like cocaine and crack, like, that's getting high. OCs, no way. And so I kept it to myself for a very long time. And in the beginning, you know, my mother found out about it, and she told me I had to go to an outpatient program. And it was a very expensive outpatient program, and I got no guidance whatsoever. As long as I paid to get the Suboxone and did the minimum meetings, nobody really bothered me. Nobody really asked me how I was doing. Nobody asked me, like, are you going to outside meetings? Do you have a sponsor? Do you have a network? Nothing. It was basically money, and that's really it. So instead of having like a preventative moment at that time, which I would have saved myself 10 years, I had to figure it out on my own. And my disease literally brought me to my knees. It brought me places that I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined I would be. But at 20 years old, in that outpatient program, if I would have been guided a little bit better by the people that technically I was paying to help me, it could have saved me a lot of pain and a lot of years. So.
Right now, we have in this room lots of policymakers and community leaders, and there's lots of things on the table. There's the idea of people being held in hospitals. Some of the programs, some of you started the programming as a result of interacting with the criminal justice system or with the court, getting arrested, being compelled or offered some kind of treatment and getting there. This is really an opportunity to talk to folks in this room about where you think we go now. You know, resources are limited, availability of options has some limitation, but where would you want to see people spending their time and resources?
Because I work in the field, I'm involved in the community, and I go to a meeting every third Wednesday of the month in Boston, the Bureau for Substance Abuse, who licenses all of our facilities. And we were talking last night about the governor's plan to hold patients for 3 days in the hospital. At first I was really against it. I thought, you know, you're not ready until you're ready. You can't force someone to get sober, but that's the same thing as suctioning someone. But in essence, it really would save somebody, because I can't tell you how many patients I admit in detox that overdose, die, get Narcan in the hospital. The ER doctor will ask them, do you want to go to treatment or do you want to leave? They leave, they overdose again, and then they call me, I admit them for treatment. You know, so I think there should be some kind of waiting period. It is, of course. I think the levels of care that we use in Massachusetts, we're at ACM level 3.7. I think that needs to go away. I think ACM level 3.5 needs to go away. I think this is emergent care. I think every hospital should have a wing for this disease. I think every doctor, nurse, everyone should be educated just like you would on the nervous system or the cardiovascular system. Addiction, same thing. If you look on Channel 5, there's news, sports, and now it's opiates. I mean, there's actually a tab for opiates on the news channels now. So it is big enough that I think that the governor is trying to show that they want to help save more lives by holding on to them for a few days, because I wasn't thinking straight. You couldn't be thinking straight. Look at what I did for a crime. Who would do such a thing? Only someone that's spiritually and mentally sick and physically sick. So yes, I think hanging on to a patient for a few days, and then when they get a little bit clearer and they're medicated appropriately and given some therapy, what would you like to do? We'd like to keep you, and give them that option. I think every hospital should have a wing in it. You know, there's an intensive care unit for someone who has a heart attack, and there's an intensive care unit for someone who has an addiction problem. I don't think it should be separated. There should be no ACM level criteria. Even though I work for a company that we honor that, and you have to meet, in Massachusetts, you have to meet certain levels of care to be admitted into a program. I can't tell you how many people have called me, and there's people in the audience today that call me because people call them. I mean, it's almost as if it's like, and it is a crisis. My phone rings and it's like panic on the other end of the line, and I know exactly what they're going through, and they don't know that I know what they're going through, because we try to stay anonymous. But I hear the panic on the other end. I just overdosed, Mary, and I need help. Where did you go? I went to the hospital. Why did they let you go? I don't understand why someone died and they let them out of the hospital. I just think it's ridiculous. So it would be nice to get rid of the levels of care that you have to meet to get into detox. You have to meet a level of care to get into CSS. So even the vets that are available, you have to meet specific criteria to get in. And if you don't meet it, you don't get that. Then what? You know?
I just want to make a comment for the medical community, just changes that are going on. And I was at a Harvard course again a couple weeks ago, and one of the questions was, how did we get into this problem? Why are there so many opiates out there? And whenever you go into the hospital, they do your 4 vital signs, which is your heart rate, your temperature, your respirations, and your blood pressure. And about, I don't know, was it 10 or 15 years ago, all of a sudden, level of pain became what they used to call the 5th vital sign. And hospitals started being measured by insurance companies on what was the level of pain that patients were in, to somehow make it think that if you have no pain, it's better, or pain is somehow a negative thing. And if you have little kids, you know, they only touch the stove once. You may tell them 1,000 times don't touch the stove, but it's the one time that they touch the stove and it hurts that they don't touch the stove again. And so pain is a real teaching thing for us. And I speak to parents groups, and they're always so happy that their kids are in sports because it's going to keep them away from drugs. But the kids that are really active in sports know that they have to perform in order to continue to keep their scholarship or be seen. And I did a talk once at Melrose, and it was the most attended talk because the parents had to go, because if the kids were going to play sports in the fall, the parents had to go to this talk, and the talk was about don't yell at the coach, don't yell at the referee, but they had me get up and give a 20-minute talk about opiates. And if you were to just give a talk to parents about opiates, they'd never show up. You'd have 10 or 15 people coming, but if you had a talk about sports and your kid couldn't play sports unless they showed up, every parent would show up, which is just my commentary on the whole situation. But in any case, so pain as a vital sign got into hospitals in payment. if your payments aren't going to be as good, if your pain scores are too high. So all of a sudden there was this, pain was a negative thing. And it's the dentists, not that I can say anything great about OBGYNs, but the dentists and the orthopedists are the two biggest prescribers, so even as parents, they need to be in the conversation. The Mass Medical Society required, starting in 2012, that in order to renew your license in the state, you had to do at least 3 hours of opiate prescribing training. So, you know, physicians that were trained in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that were over-prescribing now had to at least be educated. The insurance companies are starting to, if you write too big a prescription for opiates, you had to have a plan, a justification for it and a plan for decreasing that prescription. But over-prescribing still happens in the state, and but at least certain things are happening to decrease that.
Let's give our audience an opportunity, some questions for any of our panelists. Yeah.
That are pregnant?
Let me just repeat the question. So the question is, how many of the programs that Marie talked about will, the questioner is a nurse in the labor and delivery, how many of those will accept pregnant women?
I don't know. I know that most of the programs will take a woman who's pregnant. However, when she gets to the 6th or 7th or 8th month, most of our residential treatment programs are not equipped for any medical concerns. So getting into a program, but there has to be a transfer. I know that Project Cope and Lynn takes women and their babies, at Lena Martin, Serenity House does. Most of the women's programs certainly can even make referrals for women who, and Edwina Martin and Project Hope and Serenity House will take the woman and the baby after she's born. Meridian House right here, do you take women who are pregnant?
At the very early stage.
And then you transfer them somewhere else, which is the hard part.
Yeah. Why don't you just stand up and speak really loudly?
Oh, okay. My name is Julie. I'm a Middlesex nursing student out of Lowell. So I want to thank you for teaching me today. My question for you is, many moons ago when I was in middle school, Derek Sanderson came to my school and talked to us about his experiences with drugs and alcohol. Shared with us the vendors he went on and how he, escaped death several times. Made an impact on me because I didn't touch drugs from what he shared with us that day. So he was able to save at least one person in that speech. Do you think that there was an opportunity for you to have maybe learned something at that adolescent level that isn't present right now?
Thank you for the question. I was a product of the DARE program, which absolutely did not work. I've always been a big advocate of getting people in recovery involved in the education process because, you're never going to get a better message than from someone who's been in the trenches, who's gone through the horrors of addiction and withdrawal to warn others. At that age, a lot of kids have problems with authority figures, so when it's a teacher or a police officer, the impact isn't going to be that great. But if we could, expand programs, recovery high schools are great, and get recovering addicts in to talk to kids early on, to both, some of the horror stories and to kind of let them know what they need to look out for in themselves and in their friends, drinking for effect, stealing pills, things like that, so that we can help, curb the problem early on in their lives. And it's great to hear that kind of, listening to that kind of story really helped you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I agree with what he just said, and just to add to it, because Marian had touched on the kids who were exposed to trauma, and the doctor also talked about like pediatrics being aware, and I would say just in my experience, my personal experience, there was trauma and tragedy in my community that was because of the stigma of at that point it was suicide, which was different, but it's similar in the sense that it's a trauma, and it was very much not addressed, and we were not engaged, and had never been engaged in healthy coping. And then later on in my life, today's actually the date, but of my first boyfriend had passed away from an overdose long before I even knew anything about opiates. I didn't even know he was on it. We had ended our relationship in the past. I'm not going to get into all that, but bottom line is I didn't have healthy coping for that either. And there was such a stigma around the fact that he had overdosed and died because among my friends and family, nobody was on opiates, so I didn't know how to grieve it properly because I was ashamed to say how he had passed so suddenly at 29 years old. So I think it's another key to exposing people in recovery to be able to discuss with children, but also making sure our children who have experienced trauma, which certainly the next generation of children is going to have experienced trauma because they're having family members and friends die of heroin overdoses. So for the next generation moving forward, I think it is really important that we allow them to talk about it, that if there's special needs addressed in like a group setting and you see there's certain children who have serious trauma going on and loss, that if healthy coping and healthy grieving skills are engaged along with the awareness of recovery combined would be really important.
Well, it also speaks to, Katie, a little bit of what you talked about, which was learning and hearing one vision from your brother, which, so clearly there's some background piece of that, and you were listening to that. You know, to what Jared said, what if that message had been the opposite of what it was? I'm sorry.
Right, well, I mean, we discussed this at the previous forum, and I do have a strong belief for educating younger children on the disease of addiction, because, I mean, if you ask addicts in recovery what age they took that first drink and what age, like, if it became too much, 12, 13, 14, 15, and like, I mean, children like myself in high schools are only, they're only seeing the negative parts of it, and they're not seeing like the life and the recovery, and they don't have to live a damaged life just because their loved ones do, just because that's all that they know. So I think it's really a huge part of it, and I mean, the beautiful thing about that is it really doesn't require funding for recovering addicts to go into a school and to spread hope. I mean, at the last forum I had the assistant superintendent of the high school that I attended and graduated, come up to me and ask me if I'd be willing to do something like that. And it's, I mean, just giving that message that, hey, I was you too, and I understand, but you don't need to go through what I went through, I think is really just like a life-saving message. And I mean, there's living proof in this room that it helps someone else, and I mean, I think we have like a much better way to go about it than the DARE programs and other ways. I mean, it's not to scare someone, it's just to tell them that, hey, like, we understand what you're going through, so.
And that, those requests that came in after we began these forums is really speaks to the kind of work we're doing here. We are doing work where you are helping us, and then taking that into the community. And the good piece, as you mentioned, it isn't a very limited cost. People have just a couple more questions, yeah.
My name is Richard Winnett. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I've been to a lot of these types of events. I was at the Addiction Symposium down the Cape in September. Dr. O'Connor's message and Marie's message was the best, simple message I've heard in a long time.
They are the best.
And, you know, I think both Dr. O'Connor's and Marie's message needs to be, you know, replicated in every town. You know, I've spoken at Learning to Cope meetings. The parents don't know what they don't know. You know, they don't know where to start, what the next step is. Marie just outlined that, you know, very simply. I'm also on the board of directors of RACASA, the Reading Coalition Against Substance Abuse. The last two events they've had, the target audience was middle school. You know, and they showed the movie If Only, and a 12-year-old girl raised her hand and said to the director who was there in the panel, am I too young to see this? And the director said, I'm going to turn that back on you. Or do you think you're too young to see this? And she said no. And then she admitted that people that she was in school with are starting to smoke pot and drink. You know, so again, and with Chris Herron going around speaking, his target audience is getting younger and younger. So I think that's part of the answer. But I think I see the cameras here. That this needs to be shown in every town. So I just want to thank you too. It's the most clear, concise, easily digestible message that I've heard in a long time. I think parents can that's something they can work with. And as the other people, as the panelists have talked about, communication. There's a saying that we have at my sober house is with communication, few problems. No communication, problems. It's a disease of isolation. Parents need to start asking questions. And then they can find out if their daughter's boyfriend is, So I just want to thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. This is the second time I've heard you all speak. I really appreciate it. You just touched upon a point, and that is really difficult for us. We work on coalitions where we're trying to get education into schools. We're also working with a population that's currently using harm reduction. Do you have an opinion on how we can get the parents out and involved, educated before that child is in, before 12 years old? Because we had a forum the other day, 3 parents showed up, and they just don't want to come. How do we get them involved?
I would just say you tie it into something that they want.
That is the success. That is the way. We've had those forums in the schools where I'm in an echo chamber. And it is really our best efforts have come by saying it's something else at the school, which is, it is what it is. And it's a way to get people there.
But what about the population that isn't in sports? How do we get hold of them?
I think it's tying it to whatever is of value. You can't do an after-school program. You can't take the PSATs, whatever it is. There has to be, unfortunately, there needs to be something else to bring people up. We are fortunate to have our partnership with the cable access. We hope that gets on TV, that people see it. Grandparents that are watching it, parents are watching it, and spreading the word of that. I think what they have shared with us today helps to inform our going forward in this area. I want to thank all of you for coming and joining with us, and we look forward to continuing the partnership in this issue. Thank you.
I think that to deal with the problem of substance abuse disorder in our society, the first thing that needs to happen is that we need to raise awareness. And in raising awareness, we need to reduce the stigma of addiction. So at these events, I introduce myself with my full name. I'm Jared Owen. I'm a man in recovery. I used to IV heroin. I've been clean for 2 years. And my life is getting a lot better. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to do these kinds of panels. I think that it's very unfortunate that it takes the epidemic that's happened to get us to this point, but this is definitely a step forward towards change.
Despite all of the commitment, all of the resources, the numbers are trending in the wrong direction. So while we are continuing all of our programs on the ground, we're really trying to develop some new policies, take this to a different level. And that's what we're trying to do here today. The presentations from Dr. O'Connor and from Marie Burke really get everyone, first of all, using the same language and literally on the same page about what the medical pieces are, what the treatment options are, and then to have our panelists who have all made that journey to fairly long-term recovery talk about what's been useful to them, where intervention might have been helpful, and what changes they, as insiders, would like to see in what happens.
I think a lot of people imagine an opiate addict in an alleyway, homeless, dirty, with a needle in their arm, and that's not quite exactly what they look like. They look exactly like me. And people do recover, they get better, and they have a long, happy life, and I'm productive today, and I work as a nurse, and I love my life. Things can change.
I'd just like to say there is a better way of life. I was extremely afraid to ask for help from anyone, to expose my addiction, and it led me down a very dark path that very easily could have ended in death. Fortunately, I was put in an institution. So I'd just like to say, we're here, come to a meeting, talk to people, don't hide it.
Well, the wonderful thing about the work we're doing and the partnerships we've forged is we continue to spread this message. We are developing this as we go across Middlesex County. As you heard from one of the panelists, lots of our school superintendents have asked to take at least a small component of this and offer it to students. We're growing it into different populations.
Ask for help. Don't give up. I always say to my patients, you need two things, willingness and courage. Those two things and resources, it can be done.
I want to say that substance abuse disorder does not discriminate. It could be, your siblings, your children. I grew up in a middle-class household. I'm college educated. I was a graduate student at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology when I was sent to prison for crimes that were a result of my drug use. So no one is immune from this disease, and there is treatment out there.
A lot of pain. I think I needed to suffer as much pain as possible in order to get sober, and I had lost everything, and I needed to grow and learn how to live right again, and I did that in treatment. Without treatment, I don't think I would have gotten better.
We have really focused our multi-pronged approach on a variety of fronts. It includes education, intervention, prevention, treatment, legislation, and law enforcement. So all of those fronts, and all of as we shape our initiatives, we look at which one of those are we targeting. Often they're multiple targets, and moving forward.